All right, we're good.
All right, welcome back. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And you might have, are we at chapter 2, verse 8?
You have Acts, right?
Yeah, no. 1 Timothy, chapter 2.
Verse 8, yes,
Verse
sir.
8, okay.
Oh, man. Men and women in the church.
I think it's probably my turn to read.
Oh, yes.
All right. You're not going to fight me on that one. All right. So where do you want to read to the end of the chapter?
Yes.
All right. So 1 Timothy chapter 2 and at verse 8 beginning, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control.
Okay. Ooh, hot button subjects.
Right.
We get to talk about the women.
Right.
Okay, so first thing he says, I desire that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubting in like manner. Also, so the first thing he talks about, in the previous chapter, he talked about us praying for all men everywhere. Right? So just to set the context. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about praying for people. And now he says that we should pray for all men everywhere. Do we have to lift up holy hands, John?
I'm going to let you answer that one.
Well, I mean, it is another one of those things. It was a custom.
Right.
You know, it's not something that's mandated today.
And what was that? That was just a gesture.
I have written down as a note, lifting holy hands was a custom.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
I don't know. I mean, it's not something that we have a context for today, I guess.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and if somebody were to, I know that a lot of times in the church it's frowned upon to make any kind of gesture or
right.
any kind of outburst or anything. But is it necessarily wrong? No. Is it something that could get carried away to an end that is not godly? Maybe.
Yes.
So
if
that
you're trying to make a scene,
right? And that's Angela and I used to be a part of a group that proclaimed Christ, Church of Christ being on the sign, but they did not do the things that we can find in the first century church. We came to realize that, and I noticed that there were a few people there that when certain songs would be played, and it was instrumental place, that there would be people that would be flailing around and, dancing around like they were at a dance club or something,
yeah.
And that struck me wrong then, but especially now is you kind of understand what you're, what we're supposed to be like, in an attitude of worship to be those that are giving the glory to God. We've got no business drawing so much attention to ourselves.
If I'm going like this, it's like, look at me.
Right.
I mean, it's
right. And I while I don't know exactly what this holy hands thing is, it wasn't that.
No.
Yeah.
That's why I say we don't really have a context for it today.
Right.
I mean, there's not enough given on it to really understand what that meant.
Right.
But the people that he was writing to understood what it meant.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Some of these things that we're going to talk about, I think they were some of the things were customs.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, in a like manner. So we're talking about praying, right? He says, like manner, also that the women adorn themselves in modern apparel.
Modest.
Modest. Did I not say that?
I said modern. It's a little different.
I mean, that could go.
It could. Not all modern apparel is immodest.
No, not at all. Not at all. My wife was glaring at me over here through the window. I'm talking about you over here. So, women are to adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. I was thinking about this sort of thing the other day. As you know, when we talk about different people are susceptible to different things, and I think that women are more susceptible to being vain than men are.
Julie got home just in time.
She did get home just in time. She's in there laughing. But you know, I mean, when you see somebody dressing immodestly, 9 times out of 10 it's a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the nature. I better not say the nature of the beast, but
well, I think to some degree there's some truth in that. I think of myself when I bought, my wife and I, before we got married, we bought our house and I moved into it. I mean, she didn't until after we were married, but I moved into it, and my nightstand was a cardboard box. My mattress was on the floor.
yeah,
And I was fine with that. And then, when she came along, things changed and we got furniture.
Yeah.
And not that that's immodest or anything, but it just kind of does lend to that idea that women care more about those adornments than most men.
Yeah, I think men have other things that they're susceptible.
Right.
It's the same
Certainly.
way, And
Yeah.
I've seen some pretty vain men too.
Certainly.
But it seems like I think the reason this is addressed is because that's just a thing.
Yeah.
And if there had to have been some women that were not dressing modestly here.
Right.
Because otherwise he wouldn't have brought it up.
And there's some key words here in verse 9 with propriety and moderation.
Right. Propriety just means just proper, befitting a Christian, right?
Yeah. And not to go overboard with the moderation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it wrong for a woman to have a wedding band on? Because that's gold. Right. But the idea is are we walking around with something that is only there to catch the attention of others, or are we giving into the custom that we have in this country of having a wedding band on?
Right.
That's there's something to be said, and I think as we read this, we get the feeling that it's really all about the heart of that person.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it?
Yeah, we wouldn't think of somebody today having braided hair as being immodest.
Right.
I mean, in fact, typically that would be somebody who's pretty conservative, typically. Mm-hmm. But back then, that was a thing.
Right.
That wasn't that's why I say I think some of these things.
And that's the way that when I look at this, I'm seeing the overarching lesson there being this idea that we need to have our hearts in the right place. Now, if someone wants to take this, and say, well, I'm never going to wear gold, and I'm never going to braid my hair, and I want to make sure that all my clothes come from the Goodwill. Okay.
Yeah. But a lot of times, I'm wearing you wouldn't think of this, I'm wearing like an $80 pair of pants. Mm-hmm. I'll wear, $250 work shoes. Yeah. But nobody would say, oh man, those are fancy.
Right.
They would never say that, and unless they knew that they were expensive, they would never even know that.
And that's when you start to dissect this idea down, that's how we know, this is not like a handwriting of laws like the old law.
Yeah.
This is speaking to the heart and the reasoning behind, dressing the way that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea of being modest, mm-hmm. the reason for that is it says it's proper for women professing godliness with good works.
And I think, bearing with other brethren, we come across this world from different cultures.
Yeah.
And, I've met other preachers and their wives that come from other countries on the other side of this earth. And the way that they dress sometimes strikes you as odd. Like we wouldn't dress that way. And in some ways, you might even say that their dress is more showy in some ways than ours. But you have to just think about that for a second and realize, you have to take everything in context.
Yeah.
And you can't.
They live in a different culture.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like we can have differing cultures from one place to another. In the big city where there's a lot of, maybe professional people, the church might look in such a way like, everybody dresses, more at an upper scale, more business-like.
Yeah.
And we're out in the country, it's overalls and work boots.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you may feel one way or the other, but in the end, we got to realize that we're not the sole.
Right.
We don't have the truth cornered on this one, in our own minds.
Yeah. And the modesty lesson is for men too, obviously. Right. But I mean, it doesn't matter what style of clothing you were modest in.
Right.
To
your point, you could be immodest in wearing a pair of cowboy boots and overalls.
If they were really tight.
Well, that
I didn't have a shirt on. Well, of course, people would go, "Good grief, put something."
Or you could be stepping over the line of being too haughty and proud with it. If for instance, there was some brand of overalls that was really sought after, or boots.
Yeah.
I know there are $high boots.
Yeah.
I don't know about overalls, but I think back to middle school where we had certain brands of clothing like Cavaricci was one, and I remember. Do you remember the Skids pants? They had a little slippery when wet sign like off of the road, on the pocket, and those were like $high stuff, and most of us would look at that and want those because they were cool. You step over that line in that you're doing this to be with showmanship to show up the next person, then you've stepped over that line of propriety.
Yeah. In the same way, when we go to a worship service, we should take some care.
Yeah.
I a lot of times I show up to a Wednesday night in my work clothes. But usually for Sunday I try to, I have some nicer clothes. I try to wear those.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely think there's some wisdom in, as you say, putting some thought into how we approach the Lord for worship.
Yeah.
So, part of that's going to be clothes, but that's not all of it.
Yeah.
Because you can have the nicest designer suit and still be wretched underneath of it. And so, it's all about the heart. It's all about, bringing as you coined the title to our lesson from last week, the whole heart. You have that whole purpose of bringing the glory to the Lord in mind instead of glory for you. Yeah, and I've always speaking of this is a hang up for me. I don't even own a suit, and the reason I don't own a suit is because I'm a maintenance man. Right. And I've made I don't wear a suit. It's not something I don't have any reason to ever wear a suit. Right. So why would I start getting one to go to church? It would be weird. I mean, to me it would be. It's it depends on a lot of that depends on where you're going. Yeah. If you join up, if you move across the country and you join up with a group of people that are more formal, and you choose to identify with them and to worship with them, well then you probably want to join in on a little bit of their customs. Yeah, to some degree. Just to be a part of that group in some way. But is that totally necessary? No, I don't think we can make that argument. So no, I think in the past way too much has been put on that sort of stuff. And I think in some ways, and I know this might be hard to hear for some, but it's done damage to the cause of Christ.
It has.
Because I've talked to people who have said, well, I don't want to go to church because I'm not going to look right. I'm not going to fit in.
Yeah.
And that, a lot of that is their misunderstanding of the situation. But
Yeah.
we have to think about that as well. If we're going to be those that are going to go out and talk to others and share the gospel with them, we have to think about, how am I portraying myself? Am I portraying myself in the best way that will allow others to have a conversation with me, or am I unapproachable? And that's something that we all wrestle with to varying degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I know I've heard that same thing before, and I know that some groups can come off as really stuffy.
Yeah.
And I think in the past, like I said, there it was a thing in like the 30s and 40s and maybe 50s. Like wearing a suit was a thing.
Right.
Well, you've got people that were from that era and they're still holding on to that.
Yeah.
And like you said, it ends up doing damage rather than good.
Yeah. To varying degrees, you have to align yourself with what is common now, and out of that you have to think: is this helpful to the gospel, or is this not?
Right.
Is this modest, or is it not?
Right.
You have to go through that. You have to apply the wisdom
Absolutely.
into those, because Christ did not wear a tailored suit with a tie.
No.
I'm going to go on a limb here and say he didn't own one either.
Yeah, and probably his clothes weren't that clean.
He was. What was it said about him? He was not a. He was not pretty to look at.
Yeah, nobody would desire it.
Yeah.
So, and you got to think these people are walking around in a dusty environment, and they don't have a washer and dryer.
Right.
So I mean, washing clothes is a big chore.
That's why they washed feet.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different, but that was their culture.
Right.
So by their culture standards, and I'm not saying that Christ was dirty. I don't mean that at all.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that they have a standard that
there are
different than ours.
There are certain things that I see, via the internet, via Facebook. I've become, as we all have, our world has gotten bigger in a way, and we. I have contact with other brethren in other countries, more so than before, and I'm able to see some of the things that they do in worship, and some of those things I think, well, that's kind of odd. Why do they do it that way? And then I have to stop and think that they're not doing anything that is anti the gospel.
Yeah.
They're doing things decently and in order, but they just do something, and this is. Most of these things, it can be boiled down to a difference in culture.
Yeah.
And we have to bear with brethren in that. We can't expect everybody to do it exactly the same way.
No.
We should expect the same things in our worship.
Yeah.
When you have those avenues of worship, if you will, where we come together and we pray and we sing and we teach each other a bit of the gospel,
We
and
partake of the Lord's
we partake
Supper.
of the Lord's Supper, and we lay by and store.
Right.
All those things need to be there.
But there are like tradition elements, like having song leaders,
Right.
or having a sermon,
Yeah.
or all of that can be teaching can be done different ways. I'm trying to think of what some of the other. I just heard a lesson on these
Right.
different traditions, but those can be different. I know, like in England, they don't usually have an invitation song. Mm-hmm. That's a tradition, like you typically see
Yeah.
here, and nothing says you need to have an invitation song.
Right.
There's no written law about that.
Between song leaders, sometimes I'll notice, when one person leads songs, they'll have, 5 songs on the board. The next one will have 8.
Yeah.
And each one of them is solely convinced, this fella thinks that 8's too many. This fella thinks that 5 is not enough.
Yes.
Yes. And so, okay. So that today we're going to sing 8. And that's just the way it is.
There's, or the order of services,
Right.
there's so many things at church. So So let's get back to our text here.
What were we talking about?
Yeah, what were we? We were talking about women. We're trying to avoid the subject with. Okay. So, verse 11 says, "Let a woman learn in silence with all submission." You hear that, Julie? She's in there clearing her throat. So let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence.
Yeah.
And I believe, like, a big part of this is talking about the worship service.
Yeah.
At least it seems to be to me, but
It's I have some notes here, and to be in silence. It's a compound Greek word. The organizational number is 2192. What is that? I can't remember the name of the publication that uses those numbers.
Thayer's?
No. But anyways, if you use those, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it means to possess steadfastness. And if you go back to Second Thessalonians 3 and verse 12, it says, "Now those who are such we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ that they work in quietness and eat their own bread." And this is talking about people who would be busybodies and not working. But that word that is translated quietness there is the same word as is translated silence over here in 1 Timothy. And that word means not drawing attention to or meddling.
Right.
And so, again, this idea is not that the woman can't say a single word, but they're not to draw attention to themselves in such a way that they overtake the teaching.
If they couldn't say a word, then they couldn't sing.
Right.
They couldn't, and that's a command. So it can't mean that.
Right.
So I think the idea is it has to do with going back to authority.
Right.
There are places in the Bible where it talks about women as teachers.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Titus chapter 2. So I'll go over there. Titus chapter 2. I believe it's starting at verse 3. It is. It says, "The older women likewise that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed." So the older women are to teach the younger women.
Yeah.
And that just shows where their role is.
Right. And, speaking in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34, we see some similar verbiage, and it says, "Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church." And now, and that's, them's fighting words out in the world today. But again, when you look at this, again, Thayer talks about it with this word speak, not it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. That word means to command or to accost, to declare one's mind.
Yeah.
And so, so women are supposed to, just like all saints, they're not to accost people and to take over and to run the show. And it is just as it is. And we'll get into in the next verse. We kind of get into some reason why, but it is God's plan that the family be the place where some of this learning takes place, and the husband has the job of teaching his family, and that authority is to be heeded whether you like it or not. That's what it says. I mean, it's not Dave and John saying it.
Right. I mean, and the husband's not the lord over.
Exactly.
And discouraged, so, when people like to take this stuff and take it all out of its context.
Right.
If you have a godly husband and a godly wife and godly children, listen, it doesn't get any better than that
Right.
for everybody. It's not a, everybody's in the best place you could ever be in.
Yeah. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 19, verse 18. Wives, submit to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them.
Yeah.
So again, if you love your wife, you're not going to be, bitter and condescending and,
Yeah.
Be mean-spirited about this thing. But it just, I guess you can't, you have to go to the next verse here, where it says, in verse 13, we get kind of the why this is.
Yeah.
For Adam was formed first, then Eve. So Adam has the seniority, if you will.
Right. God has an order of things.
Being formed in the likeness of God. But also, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And when you go back to Genesis chapter 3, and look at that, that's exactly the case. Eve was the one that was deceived, and she, in turn, now Adam is not innocent in this because he just blindly followed his wife's lead, but nonetheless, that is the authority and the logic according to God.
Are you saying all women are gullible?
No. In fact, a great many of them are
wiser than
are
a
wise.
lot of men.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I know that I'm going to throw you a rope here. I know that you can say, just as I can say about my wife, is they've saved us from some trouble in our lives because they exercised more wisdom than us at times.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of that marriage relationship as God has established it. That there be a head, there be a husband, there be a wife, and then children if it be, but there's that love one for another. The man it just is what it is. He's the protector and the caretaker, and as when those two, when a husband and wife work together, it works out quite well.
I've had a woman for a boss for 20 years, and you know what? She's been a great boss.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem accepting her authority at work because again, I'm not married to her,
right?
So it's outside of that, and it's outside of the church. So, these are the things where God has specified these things.
Yeah.
So, it's not even sexist.
Right.
Right. It's just, and the problem is people get worked up over these things. Listen, God said it.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
You can hate it. That's fine, but God still said it.
And if you read into it, all sorts of vitriolic, vitriolic, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
All sorts of vitriolic things, things that are just simply not true, that this doctrine is somehow teaching that men need to beat their wives and keep them into submission. You don't understand what you're saying.
Right.
You haven't looked at the scriptures as a whole to understand how it is that God has commanded that the marriage relationship work.
Absolutely.
This verse 15 is one that we'll let you answer. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. What you got in there?
I have as a note. I said women have the honor of bearing children, and a savior was brought into the world by a woman. Right. Mm-hmm. And then I have. I said this salvation, right, is conditional, right? Mm-hmm. So that salvation demands faith. It demands charity, which is a fruit of faith. It demands holiness, which is a separation, right, from the things of the world. It demands sobriety. Mm-hmm. It demands modesty. It demands soundness of mind.
Yeah.
All of those things.
I kind of can't help but get my mind off of the idea that points towards Christ. Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she, I think we're pointing back to Eve, will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control.
Well, what it was said that Eve would bruise the devil's heel, right? I think that's how it was. Or no,
The serpent would bruise her heel.
Is that how that was worded? And of course, you can't help but think about Mary, who brought Jesus into the world.
Right.
That was obviously a prophecy pointing towards that. So.
Yeah, and if you read through the scriptures, you understand, and if you read them to understand them,
right? Absolutely.
You come to the realization that women are very powerful in the church. Oh, if you think that anything goes down without some input from the women in the amongst the brethren, you're deceived.
Right.
I mean, there's for every elder, which we're going to get into in the next chapter, for every elder, there's an elder's wife behind him.
Oh, absolutely.
Helping.
That's why there's qualifications for an elder's wife.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and so that there's just no truth to the idea that this is some kind of misogynistic, sexist kind of doctrine.
No, unless you don't understand the scriptures.
Yeah.
So she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control.
Yeah.
Which is certainly true of everybody as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it was talking about, we're speaking sort of singularly here. Adam was not deceived, but the woman.
Right.
But then it goes, and nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and that kind of, does that point towards the future generations being faithful? Well, just something to throw out there and
interesting.
Think about.
I guess we just can't know every little.
Can't know that right now.
All right, we better stop, John.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in. We'll see you next time.